Hello.
Hello. Do you have things you wish to say, or are we just asking questions?
Questions. I'm happy for your questions.
Are the amendments dead, or will they be introduced?
Look, what we acknowledged today is there was insufficient consultation, that more work had to be done to hear from Indigenous communities and from Canadians across the board. It is absolutely critical that this bill get adopted. It's important that we take handguns off our streets and assault-style weapons. And there's a couple of items that we still need to have conversations about that were contained in the amendments. As an example, the 3D printing of guns and how that is used by gang members. Or if we take a look at gun companies potentially using loopholes to find a way to create assault-style weapons that they can get back on the streets and evade the law. I mean, we saw that in tobacco. Every time you created legislation to block it from getting to kids, they would find loopholes. So it's incredibly important that we achieve that. And what we've also acknowledged, it's incredibly important that we respect hunters and that we make sure that we're not affecting folks who are hunters and their lives.
So are the amendments going to be reintroduced, or are they dead?
We have retracted those amendments, and we are continuing a conversation on how we can address the items that I just talked about. Mais c'est clair, la sécurité publique est notre première responsabilité. Et c'est absolument essentiel de s'assurer que notre communauté est sécure. Et il y a certains types d'armes à feu qui n'est pas acceptables. Et il n'y a aucune place pour certains types d'armes à feu dans notre communauté. Et alors, c'est clair dans le projet de loi actuel, aujourd'hui, qu'il y a des choses tellement importantes. Et aussi, on doit continuer de trouver des solutions pour des autres types d'enjeux, par exemple le ghost guns, et aussi de s'assurer que les compagnies qui manufacturaient les armes à feu ne l'utilisent pas des loopholes. Et sur ça, on va continuer notre discussion.
Si vous aujourd'hui les amendements, est-ce que c'est simplement pour calmer le jeu devant la grosse...
Non. Alors, c'est clair. Ont besoin plus de temps de parler avec des communautés autochtones, avec les Canadiens et Canadiennes généralement, et que la consultation n'était pas suffisante. Alors, ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle c'était nécessaire d'annuler les amendements, mais les discussions vont continuer.
We haven't answered directly yet, as Steph was trying to get you to. Is the government still looking at banning some of these single-fire hunting rifles that got caught up in this amendment? Is this done? Are you still looking at regulating them down the road after more consultation?
Well, look, let's be very clear. It is not our intention to impact hunters. This is our intention to make sure that the types of assault-style weapons that we saw being used in mass casualty tragedies, like in Sainte-Foy and the mosque in Quebec, or at Polytechnique, or unfortunately in many other places, that these get removed from our streets. It is not our intention to impact those that are hunting and using firearms for hunting. And we acknowledge and regret that the consultations that we undertook were not sufficient and that there were gaps and problems in the amendments. That's why we've retracted them. And we want to make very clear that our objective to keep our community safe and to go after the types of guns that Canadians want to see removed is our priority.
How did you screw this up so badly?
Well, look, I think that any time you're dealing with, and I used to be the critic for public safety, I was the parliamentary secretary for public safety, and I can tell you that any time you deal with guns, you're dealing with an enormously complex and emotional issue because you have two very passionate and rightfully passionate communities. On the one hand, you have people who have been subject to violence, either themselves directly or their families, and who rightfully want to see action taken to make communities safer and to remove the type of weapons and guns that were used in those mass casualty events or in the ways in which they or their families were victimized. And on the other hand, like my grandfather, you have people whose very massive part of their life and is hunting, and in some cases their livelihood. And they're deeply passionate about that and want to make sure that the tradition that they have had, in many cases for generations, is not affected. And so anytime you weigh into something that is that emotional, that is that passionate, it's not going to be easy. And I can't, frankly, think of a single time that we've ever dealt with legislation with regards to firearms that has been easy. But what you have to do each step of the way is make sure you're getting it right, that you're listening, that you are engaging with Canadians, that you're engaging with other parties, that you're working across the aisle, and you're amending, and you're not afraid to say, okay, we need to change that a little bit. The consultations and the listening is telling us we didn't get it right. And remember, we're still moving through the committee process. This is why we have a committee process. The intention of our system isn't to have a perfect bill with no mistakes in it, and just to walk around through committee as an exercise in just ticking a box. The purpose of committee is to have these kinds of discussions and this kind of deliberation. We should celebrate in our system that changes get made, that we listen to one another, and that we improve legislation.
Donc concrètement, si on adopte les amendements, mais vous trouvez quand même que ça vaudrait la peine de passer une autre législation plus tard, de faire de consultation par rapport à ces normes?
C'est clair que le travail de s'assurer que notre communauté sont sécure et de continuer nos efforts pour la sécurité publique va continuer. Mais oui, avec ce projet de loi ici, actuellement, on va continuer de parler avec des autres partis au comité s'il y a des possibilités de faire travail sur l'enjeu de ghost guns, par exemple, et des autres enjeux. Mais ça, c'est une conversation au comité et avec les Canadiens et les Canadiennes généralement, et aussi avec les communautés autochtones. Mais mais ce n'est pas juste avec cet enjeu-là. Généralement, on va continuer nos efforts en total plus grand que ça.
Donc, on va voir d'autres législations par la suite pour encadrer davantage.
Oui, c'est un gouvernement minoritaire. Alors, ce n'est pas notre choix. On doit travailler avec des autres partis et on doit parler avec des personnes qui sont impliquées avec le projet de loi. Et il y a certaines inquiétudes avec des enjeux comme des ghost guns et on doit continuer de travailler sur ça. Mais oui, notre travail va continuer.
So, sorry, just to clarify here. So you may still, in fact, amend Bill 321 to include some of the current amendments that are being pulled, but you also might not, and maybe you're going to introduce a new bill?
Well, I don't. What I'm saying is that there are, right now, we have a very good bill that does incredibly important things in terms of keeping our community safe and taking action on the types of firearms that Canadians don't want to see on our streets. What we have to continue to have is a conversation on a couple of issues. One of them, I said, are what are called ghost guns. These are these 3D manufactured guns that are being used more prevalently in criminal environments that we want to see action taken on. And there seems to be a great deal of consensus on that. So we want to continue our discussion about how we address ghost guns. The other issue that I mentioned there is real concern is around the loopholes that companies that manufacture guns might use to create assault-style weapons that might find a way to get the exact type of weapons Canadians want to see off the streets that were involved in mass casualty events, to make sure that those weapons don't come there. And of course, in a minority government, I don't dictate what form that might take. All I'm saying is there remains a concern on those two issues and that we need to continue our discussions and find a way forward.
It's been a long-held worry amongst people, especially hunters, that the Liberal government is going to come for their guns, be it the one-gun registry, be it the current bans and buyback programs we're seeing. After this whole situation, how do you try to maintain confidence in those people who do hunt, who do use rifles as a tool? How do you get confidence in them that you aren't going to come for their guns in the long term after this whole situation?
Well, I think that we be straight, as I have been here, that the consultations that we had with respect to this bill were not.
The government hasn't been straight. At first, you're saying, no, we're not taking hunting rifles away when it first came out. Then it came up. Some might get taken away. That became, yes, some are going to be taken away, but overall we need to keep our streets safer. Like the messaging has changed a lot over the past few months in this file. How do you square all that away now by saying?
I think that we have to be very. I think we have to be very careful. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very emotive issue. My grandfather had a hunting camp and hunted his entire life. It was a major part of his identity. I get it deeply, profoundly. Nobody is going after hunters. Nobody wants to see hunting end in this country. Where that position, which is an immovable object, comes up against our concern about keeping our communities safe, is the line we draw between those two worlds. And that is not an easy line to draw, but we are committed to not affecting hunting and at the same time taking the types of guns that are capable of mass carnage off the streets so that we don't have what happened in Polytechnique, what happened in Sainte Foy in Quebec with the mosque, that we don't see these kinds of events so that there aren't these kinds of weapons that are really meant for a battlefield. And of course, that is not an easy line to draw. That is a difficult and hard conversation, but that's exactly why we need to work in a reasonable, level-headed way as different parties to sit down and talk about those differences and get it right. That's exactly what we're trying to do here.
Last question. Toujours trouver une façon d'avoir des critères qui établissent quelles sont des armes d'assaut. Donc, on pourrait voir certaines des armes qui étaient sur la liste être incluses dans ces critères.
Oui, c'est clair pour moi. C'est le type d'armes à feu qui sont capables de tuer beaucoup de personnes en même temps. C'est un type d'arme à feu qui est pour une bataille, c'est pas pour chasseurs. Et ça, c'est notre objectif, de protéger la vie de quelqu'un qui veut chasser, mais en même temps de protéger notre communauté. Merci beaucoup.